Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the 20th Stephen Roskill Memorial Lecture. This event has been happening every 2 years since 1985. My name's Alan Packwood. I'm the director of the Archive Centre, but my role this evening is a very simple one. I'm really giving the housekeeping notices. So this is the time to turn your mobile phones to silent. If you want to use social media about this event, the hashtag is Roskill24. Now is also the time to note the fire exits, which, because of the warm weather, are open and fairly obvious down here and at the back of the room. We're not planning any tests this evening. And just be aware that we are filming tonight's proceedings, and there also will be photography at the reception afterwards. So if you don't want to be filmed or photographed, you need to blend into the background. Format for this evening is that the lecture will be followed by a reception within the Archive Centre to which you are all invited. And because of the unseasonably seasonal weather, we're going to be opening the big bronze doors in the Jock Colville Hall and spilling out onto the grass outside. But don't spend all your time on the lawns outside, because there's also going to be a display in the Archive Centre reading rooms. The Archive Centre team has selected some wonderful material from the collections on the themes of women in Parliament and the Roskill lectures past and present. For those of you staying to dinner, it will be in the main dining hall at 7:30 and will be gonged from the reception. Your coats, if any of you have coats on a day like this, will be moved across from the Wolfson Foyer area here to the main corridor by the Porter's Lodge. Edward Roskill will give the after-dinner speech on behalf of the Roskill family. I'm sorry to say that the speaker and some of our guests are going to have to depart before the dinner. For that, I think you can blame the Prime Minister for calling an election. In a moment, I'm going to ask our master, Professor Dame Feeney Donald, to introduce our speaker. But before I do, I want to use this opportunity to pay the Archive Centre tribute to Afeni, because this will be her last archives-related event. And when Afeni took on this 70% STEM college, she probably didn't realise how much of her time the archives would take up. With the Churchill College Archives Trust, there's the Winston Churchill Archive Trust, the Margaret Thatcher Archive Trust. She probably didn't realise that we would want her papers and that we would want her help in getting the papers of so many others. But she's been absolutely steadfast in her leadership, support and advocacy for the Archive Centre. And on behalf of the whole team, Afeni, thank you very much. You actually told me yesterday that life after the mastership might give you and Matthew the chance to attend even more of our Archive Centre events, and I hope that is the case. But having said that, I'm particularly glad that you're here tonight. Afeni.
Thank you very much, Alan, for those kind words. The archives, I'm a physicist for those of you who don't know me, and the archives always seem to me a wonderful counterpart to the 70% STEM that the college is about. And the college should be about being polymaths and interdisciplinary and all that, and there's a great example here. So I'm delighted to be able to support the archives. But you're not here to listen to me. You're here to hear someone who has been in Parliament for a very long time, and I'm sure will have many fascinating things to tell us about it. It's hard to believe that the time has come round for another Roskill lecture. I've been to all the ones that have happened during my tenure here. It's been an incredible series started by the late Bill Barnett in memory of former research fellow Captain Stephen Roskill, who was one of the founders of our Archive Centre. And this wonderful centre itself is celebrating its 50th anniversary. It's great to see 3 generations of the Roskill family here in the audience, as well as so many friends of the college and the archives. Looking out over this absolutely packed house, I'm sure that the series remains in good health, and I look forward to being able to come to the next one in 2 years' time. As Master, as Alan said, I sit on a lot of the relevant trusts ex officio, and it's been a real pleasure to watch the collections continue to grow, and especially to play a role in facilitating the diversification of the holdings. It's not just white men now. We are definitely broadening it. I hope we will get more female scientists as well as female politicians, and I think Harriet's papers are already here. Yep, ready to be sorted over the summer, I believe. So the centre houses the papers of many wonderful people, including some prominent scientists. I hope we can get more. But people like Lisa Meitner's papers and Rosalind Franklin, whose sister is with us today. The centre has certainly not just been for conservative politicians. Yes, of course, it's got the papers of Churchill and Thatcher, but it also has the papers of Ernest Bevin, Neil Kinnock, and now those of several people in this audience, including Kay Andrews, Charles Clarke, who I think had to drop out at the last moment, and Patricia Hewitt likewise. So we have their papers, if not their physical presence today. And as I say, one of the most recent collections to arrive are those of our speaker. Harriet needs little introduction from me. She's been a presence for over 40 years in our public and political life, the mother of the House, a former Labour minister and cabinet minister, the deputy leader of her party from 2007 and acting leader in 2010. But above all, she's a campaigner who has led on gender equality and who has consistently championed change in British public and political life. Most recently, as chair of the Commons Privileges Committee, she held the then Prime Minister, well, he still is, to account over COVID. Sorry, slight slip there. No, he's not the same. No, that was Boris he held. I am getting myself in a right mess here. This election sadly sees Harriet leaving the House, or she probably wouldn't be here at all with us. Although this date was booked a long time ago, I suspect that if she was standing for re-election, we would have had to think again about the Roskill lecture. And although it's said that all political careers end in failure, hers is once again the exception. I am sure that she will argue, either in this talk or over drinks, that there is more to do. And I'm sure that she will do much more from outside of Westminster. We should be very thankful that she's been able to do so much and been such a visible, inspirational and pioneering force in our country. Harriet, over to you. Oh, do you think I can just move that? No.
I'm getting rid of the tech and having a wodge of papers instead. Should we just unplug it?
If AV doesn't like what we're doing...
Oh, well, we'll put it on the side here. That's all right. Thank you, Dame Athene, and thank you so much for inviting me here. It's lovely to see so many members of the Roskill family, and thank you to Churchill for allowing me to give this lecture. It's such an honour. It's been fascinating to look at previous Roskill lectures. I was struck by so much about them, but just one thought. By what Margaret Macmillan said in her 2018 Roskill lecture, talking about her grandfather, a man from a generation which did not, as we call it now, share. All she knew of his war service was that his uniform was in their childhood dressing up box and his medals in their toy box. I too have a dressing up box story, but rather than telling a story of what men did, it told a story about what a woman couldn't do. My mother, born in 1918, had been, very unusually for a woman in those days, called to the bar as a barrister. But she was never able to practice as a barrister because she was a wife and a mother, and that had to be her priority. You know, that was the big aim in life, to actually get a husband, and then to be a housewife. Her barrister's wig and gown was in our dressing up box. Our father never talked about his wartime service in North Africa, but part of our childhood was the ancient camp bed we used to play on, made out of canvas, which nearly chopped our small fingers off every time we set it up. Still a lot less dangerous than the hand grenade, which was in Professor Macmillan's toy box. There was not much health and safety about children in those days. I couldn't be more pleased to be at Churchill College because of the tremendously important work that you're doing on the archives, and because I myself now am a fully archived person. Back when I was in government, some of my colleagues would write their diaries, and I used to look over at Jack Straw and Peter Hain in Cabinet and see them scribbling away for their diaries. And I would be both incredulous and also disapproving. Shouldn't they be concentrating on rebuilding the NHS and rescuing the economy rather than looking to how they were going to report their glittering career in their memoirs? And how different their lives must be from mine. I couldn't even find one moment in the day as I struggled with the competing demands of a needy inner city constituency, bringing up 3 children, trying to get Labour into government and fighting alongside my sisters in the women's movement. But, as it turned out, I did have a unique set of papers. Before I was an MP, I was a solicitor, so it was ingrained in me to take notes in every meeting I was in. I mean, solicitors will know this. You can't actually switch your brain on unless you've actually got your pen in your hand and you're writing in your notebook. So I had a record, not of what I was thinking, but what people were saying. And as a solicitor, you had to keep your notebooks for 6 years, so I just kept mine forever. But because I was multitasking, in amongst those notes of constituency meetings in my notebooks, there's constituency meetings, cabinet committees about the miners' strike and the global financial crisis, but there's also shopping lists, reminders to get the electricians in, notes of who was having a birthday party. And the thing about these notebooks is that they were not written for posterity, but posterity has now got them in the archives. I mean, honestly, God knows what is in them, but I have such trust in the archivists that I'm sure it will be fine. But then there's my monthly written reports to my constituency Labour Party from 1982 to 2024. Think how many months there are between 1982 to 2024. It was not custom or practice for MPs to write a report to their party members every month. But this is why I did. I was selected to be Labour's candidate for Peckham in 1982 by the narrowest majorities, in a party which was riven by factionalism and whose MPs were mostly men, mostly older men, certainly not younger women. Getting myself selected was just the first step. Every single day after that, I had to prove myself that I was actually doing things. I had to protect myself against malicious rumours about what I'd said or done. And I also wanted to set out the political line for them to be able to follow the big issues of the day. So every month, and you can see the font of the typewriters changing over time, from starting looking as though Agatha Christie's typed them. They're so absolutely ancient. So every month I typed out what was usually a 5-page report to my local constituency party members, which I then got printed out and circulated, telling them what I was doing at Parliament, what was happening at Labour Party conference, that I'd had a baby, that I'd been on an NUM picket line in Kent with said baby, that I'd been to the Aylesbury Estate Tenants Associations, that I was campaigning for a new pensioners' centre. I had to do this to defend myself, but also wanted my reports to be their window into politics. You know, they'd got me elected. I felt it was right to tell them what I was doing for all the good and ill and the turbulence that was going on. And I also, as I say, had to exercise political leadership in what was a turbulent political time. One of my reports, sadly, in '83, actually has to remind the local party that in 1983, when we lost loads of seats, that was a bad election result, because the ultra-left thought that they'd succeeded in getting the Labour Party to adopt very left-wing policies, and they thought that was a great success. And I had to remind them in my report that it was not a success if actually we lost MPs and were even more further and darkly into opposition. As I said, my monthly reports include announcements about my pregnancies, the births of my babies. And by the way, there doesn't seem to have been any maternity leave in my monthly reports. They go on straight after having the baby born, where in Guy's Hospital, what they weighed. You know, I know particularly the women in the party were interested in how many pounds my babies were, so I put it in the report. My local party needed to know, and my monthly reports were how I told them. And I certainly felt it was imperative to tell them of every tenants or trade unions meeting I attended, every hospital or nursery I visited, what was going on there, every constituency I campaigned in all around the country, in case they thought that I was just relaxing at home with my children or on some holiday. At that point, there were no other MPs with young babies, let alone 3. So I had to prove that you could be an MP and a mother of young babies, so I had to tell them what I was doing. So there are now, in your brilliant archives, over 40 years of these monthly reports. When I looked through them, as I boxed them up for their journey here to Churchill, I felt so sad for my younger self, how hard I had to try, how hard I had to work, how difficult it was, both on the home front and on the work front. Difficult to survive in a House of Commons where the prevailing view was that you were undermining your husband, and by definition all husbands, by not being at home cooking his dinner as their wives were, and bruising and disturbing to know that the conventional view was that you were ruining the lives of your children by not being at home every day when they came back from school, with the sneaking suspicion that perhaps they were right. Perhaps I was ruining my children by not being at home every day when they came home from school. But I was also certain, and I always have been, that though in those boxes is the story of one woman MP, it's actually the story of every woman at that time who was rejecting the notion that you only had a career if you'd failed to have a family. We were going to try to do both. And whether it was women in the arts, business, the professions, the media, trade unions, or the public sector, we did try to do both. And I knew I had the support of other women outside of politics who had similar struggles in their lives. My reports also show how excruciatingly long it takes to make change. Reading back over the reports, literally decades ago, making exactly the same arguments, sometimes in the exact same words, on the lack of childcare, the inexcusability of domestic violence, the unfairness of unequal pay, and the travesty of excluding women from politics, the frustration of opposition, the challenges of government. But anyway, it's all in there, and I'm just so grateful to Churchill for taking it, and I feel that I can rest from my struggles now I've put them to bed in your archives. When you kindly invited me to give this lecture, the assumption was that once we were safely through May, there would be no election till November, though some clearly knew different, at least according to the bookies. But anyway, now we meet today in the absolute heat of a general election campaign. And as you'd expect, I've been all around the country, and I'm so sorry, it's Northampton tomorrow, so I won't be able to join you for dinner, supporting our Labour candidates, and it really is the strangest atmosphere. For a start, I know where every single Pret is on Euston Station, King's Cross, because of going to Scotland, the West Midlands, the North. I know every Pret on Liverpool Street because we go out to East Anglia, you know, we've held seats there. Similarly with Victoria, there's marginal seats in Kent. Similarly, Paddington, because there's Wales, there's the West. But never before have I needed to campaign from Waterloo. I feel an absolute stranger there. But we have been going out from Waterloo into the home counties, and it is very surprising indeed. I'm not going to second guess the voters, but it is very surprising. In Scotland, I've knocked on doors to find people enraged with the SNP saying, you know, they're going on about independence and I can't get a GP appointment. In England, people raging, most recently, about MPs betting, but I can't get a GP's appointment. But for us to get into government, it truly is a mountain to climb. And it's worth remembering, as recently as 2019, the people in this country, when they last had the chance to vote, voted for 162 more Tory MPs than Labour MPs. You know, that's why we say there is an electoral mountain to climb. That is a lot of people who are going to need to change their mind for us to get a majority. That's why, you know, whatever the polls say, we are working hard in order to do that. And what I found out on the doorstep, from Scotland through to the home counties, reinforces my sense that if, as I hope we get into government, as well as sorting out our public services and our economy, a priority will have to be restoring public trust and fixing our democracy. It's always been the case that some will say, you're all the same, you're all in it for yourself, what's the point of voting, nothing changes, but it is worse now. There is no magic bullet on this, but there are many things that can be done, and they should be. People are entitled to have a democracy that they can feel confident of and justifiably proud of and able to trust, and they don't feel that now. So, on the brink of what I hope might be a change of government, I'm glad to have the opportunity to suggest some further changes for the new government and the new parliament. I've limited myself to 5 points. Who doesn't love a 5-point plan? You know, in those notebooks you will find many 5-point plans, but I promise you I have countless more, but I'll just stick to 5 for the moment, and not in any particular order, but I want to start with the need for us to tackle threats and violence in our politics. There's always been a degree of threats. When my children were little, I was beset by a violent former prisoner coming to my house and my advice surgeries. You know, he was what we now describe as a fixated individual. For years, I just endured it, afraid that if I reported it, it would make him even worse. That no one would care, that they wouldn't take it seriously, or worse, and this is the defensiveness all the time, that people would say, there you are, a woman is just too weak to be an MP. She's just focusing on her own fears. She can't look after your constituents or speak up for you in Parliament because she is too weak. So I just put all his letters and the notes he stuffed through our front door, which I snatched up before my children saw them, I put them all in a plastic bag. Until the day I got a call from the Maudsley Hospital saying that he was in there threatening to kill me, and they felt he absolutely meant it. Me and my husband were in our bed one night when Fathers for Justice scaled up the walls of our house and set up camp on our roof. The family had to move out till they came down, as the police were afraid there'd be casualties if they took them down by force. You know, every MP has had the odd individual shouting at them and shouting at their staff in their advice surgeries, but it has been getting worse since I first became an MP. Particularly, it's worse if you're a young woman MP, particularly if you're black. But actually, it's bad now for nearly all, if not all, MPs. When I was a deputy Labour leader, I used to do something called Harriet in the High Street. We love an alliteration, you know. I'd put it out online that I was going to be in whatever high street, anywhere in Scotland, England or Wales, and I'd just show up and talk to any shoppers who might have seen that I was going to be there, and I'd have a little team of people with me, and we'd just talk to people and hear what they were saying and chat to them. I wouldn't dream of doing that now. You know, the police would have apoplexy if they thought I was. And that's a change in how we go about interacting with people. It's a regular thing now to see MPs' offices smashed up and vandalised. MPs are jostled or shouted at in the shops. There's horrible reports today from harassment of Suella Braverman in her local supermarket. So, you know, it's absolutely jostling, shouting at in the shops, homes being surrounded by angry demonstrators, and they're subject to online pylons threatening rape and death. That's pile-ons, not pylons, yeah. This affects not just them, but their families. You can't protect your teenage children from seeing lurid rape threats against you online. Your children will be dreading that confrontation in the supermarket. Your elderly relatives, afraid of the demonstrators camped outside your home, will fear leaving the family home. 2 MPs, Joe Cox and David Amess, have been killed. This election campaign has been marred by violence. It restricts campaigning, meaning the public don't get the same access to personal conversations with their candidates. And the candidates don't get to hear, the way they should, direct from people what they're thinking. So people don't get to see their MPs out and about to the degree that was perfectly normal before, and that contributes to the sense that MPs are different from and don't understand the lives of their constituents. And it stops the MPs hearing directly and randomly from those it's our job to represent. Not just the people who've got a problem and come in to see you in your advice surgery, not the people who've got who are part of parties and want to be part of campaigns, but just people who you meet in the street so you can hear what they've got to say. It makes MPs more out of touch not to be able to do that. A few years ago, I was vilified in the media for wearing a stab vest. And in fact, when I was doing Prime Minister's questions against William Hague, his lead attack and making everybody laugh at me was that I'd been wearing a stab vest in my constituency, when what I'd been doing is I'd been out on a patrol with my local police as part of my constituency duties, and the police were all wearing stab vests, and I just put on a stab vest, same as you put on a hairnet in a fish factory, even if you're not actually going to fillet the fish. But that sort of jeering and sneering wouldn't happen now. No one has criticised Tobias Ellwood for saying that he keeps a flak jacket in the boot of his car. And the Common Security Services issue MPs with personal alarms and home alarms as standard. MPs have told me that because of the endless abuse and threats, on some issues, they will abstain rather than vote. On some issues, they will vote but not speak. On some issues, they will not add their name to a motion, even if they agree with it. They're making calculations all the time. They'll stick their neck out, but only so far. Violence and threats makes them make a calculation, not just in relation to going out and about, but also how they act in Parliament. One MP who was targeted by the man who then went on to kill David Amess has stood down from Parliament. And this is deadly for democracy. Voters elect their MPs. They must then be able to do their work without fear or favour. We can't go on just wringing our hands and uttering denunciations after every awful incident. We need to take action. To do this, we have to have a proper process. We have to bring together all those who have responsibility, all together in the same process. All the political parties, all the agencies, police, Crown Prosecution Service, security services, councils, the social media companies, broadcasters, editors, the Electoral Commission, Committee on Standards in Public Life, the government, the house authorities. They've all got to be brought together to focus on this and to find a solution. And the way to do this, and because fundamentally this is about Parliament, This is not about government, this is about Parliament. The way to do it is to have a speakers' conference, which is quite a rare creature. And the speakers' conference will marshal the evidence and can require action across the piece. We need to agree a clear delineation of what is protected as free speech and what steps over the line, and relentlessly and consistently impose sanctions when that happens. I don't believe this growing level of violence deters people from standing for Parliament. I can't speak for the other parties, but we have a remarkable cadre of new candidates stepping forward, including unprecedented numbers of women. They shouldn't, none of them should have to put up with this if they get elected to Parliament. And this is not just about protecting them, it's about protecting our democracy. My second point is a tad more technical, but nonetheless, I think of fundamental importance. I hope you'll bear with me when I talk about the electoral register. Everyone who has a right to vote has a right to be on the electoral register. That register not only allows you to vote by post or at the polling station, it's also the basis on which the country is divided up into 650 constituencies. The problem is that the register is fundamentally flawed. It's been recognised for many years now, and the Electoral Commission has been very clear about this, that the register, whilst it fully includes those who are middle-aged, white, rural, older, suburban homeowners, fully registered, if you are young, renting, black or Asian, live in a city, you are less likely to be on the register. That is the fact. And this is not a small problem. There are 7 million people missing from the register in what the Electoral Commission says is an outdated registration system. And it's not just their right to vote which is at issue here. It's the delineation of parliamentary seats. Suburban white areas of homeowners are overrepresented in Parliament, and inner cities of council estates of renters are underrepresented. If those missing millions were on the register, the way that constituencies would divide up around the country would mean we would have 8 more constituencies in London and 5 more in Birmingham, and so it goes on. Within that 650, they would be differently allocated. This is a breach of our commitment to equality. It makes me think that instead of retiring, I should take a legal case, perhaps judicial review against the Electoral Commission or somebody to actually, under the Equality Act, to get this sorted out, but I'm supposed to be relaxing. Anyway, it's a breach of our commitment to equality and a stain on the fundamental basis of our democracy. But what I find so frustrating is that it could be so easily fixed. Instead of the laborious and expensive process for councils having to run registration schemes whereby they contact everyone numerous times asking them to register themselves, we should just put people on the register like they do in most other European countries. With the data available and already verified data, in HMRC, in schools, the NHS, councils, DVLA, the Home Office, the DWP, to name just some, we could easily create the register just like that. And it is a source of frustration to me that despite having actually been a junior minister in the department responsible for elections and putting this forward, I got nowhere on it, and having been Minister for Equality in the Cabinet and putting this forward, I got nowhere on it, so I hope someone else will. The next point is about big money in politics, something else which the public hate and which undermines public trust in our democracy is large amounts of money swishing about in politics. People and parties should win elections on the basis of their arguments, not on the basis of how much money they have or can raise. When the public see rich people giving money to political parties or individual politicians, they don't think, that's good, he's supporting our democratic process. They think, what are they buying? It's unfair. They're buying access and influence that I can't have because I don't have the money. We need to lower the cap on donations and spending across the board. The Conservative government raised the general election spending limit last November, just ahead of this general election, from £19 million to £35 million. That is terrible. That should be reversed. They've increased the amount ministers can receive without having to declare it. That too should be reversed. The public want more transparency, not less. And we need low spending caps on internal elections within parties too. Party members and the public hate to see money buying positions. And with political communication being largely by social media, which is free, there's even less justification for big spending on internal party elections than there was in the old days when candidates had to buy printed materials, envelopes and stamps. I'll never forget one night in the Labour deputy leadership campaign in which I was a candidate in 2007. And Joan Ruddock MP, who was my campaign manager, called me and said she was on her way over to my house and she needed to meet urgently with me, and my husband Jack needed to be there too. I couldn't imagine what she was coming to talk about. To our horror, she told us that the party had suddenly agreed to allow all the candidates to send a letter to every single member. The election was underway, so it would have to be within the next 5 days. We couldn't have a situation where all the other candidates, who were all better funded than I was, sent a letter out to every member, and actually no letter came from me. It would have been absolutely hopeless, and all the people who'd stuck their necks out by nominating me would have felt completely let down. My campaign had the election was underway, so it would have to be within the next 5 days. So it was very sudden. My campaign had no money, as I was the bookies' prediction to come last. We could afford the train fares to travel around the country, but that was it. Joan said, unless I could find £50,000 in the next 24 hours, I'd have to pull out of the campaign. Could we do that? Jack and I, my husband, spoke in reply at exactly the same time. I said no, he said yes. I was wondering, what secret stash he might have. To my astonishment, I said, how are we going to find the money? He said to Joan, we're going to remortgage our house. So that's what we did, together with borrowing a temporary loan from my sister for about 48 hours until we got the second mortgage. I just have to highlight this as the most exceptional matrimonial backing when I was slated to lose for him to leap 50k into debt. But the point was that he believed in me and thought I could win. And as it turned out, I did. But had I not had such exceptional and unconditional support from Jack, money would have excluded from the race the person who, as it turned out, members most wanted to vote for. As deputy leader, bearing in mind this experience, I did try and get the spending caps reduced, but failed. I seem to be mentioning a lot of things that I failed to do at this point, but this is like the next stage that needs to be done. The party's big trade union donors opposed reducing the cap, but I still hope we will clamp down on spending and we won't continue to follow the USA down the path where money holds sway in politics. 2 final points. To command public confidence, Parliament needs to be able to deal with the new issues of the day. One of those is artificial intelligence. AI is going to, and we need it to, transform productivity in our economy and in our public services. We absolutely must grasp the opportunities it presents with a national strategy across all regions and nations and all sectors, underpinned by investment support and a workforce strategy. But it needs to be regulated effectively so that it can safely grow. The inadequacy of our current model of technology regulation was starkly exposed by our attempt to regulate social media in the online safety bill. This was not hampered by being a partisan issue. It wasn't subject to party political wrangles, and yet it took 10 years from David Cameron's speech in 2013, setting out his intention to regulate, to when it became law in 2023, with green papers, white papers, drafts bill, and so on and on. Everyone in the House of Commons cared about it, but it was complicated. We didn't have the expertise, and our processes were so slow that we would constantly get somewhere and then be overtaken by developments, so we'd have to start again. Now, developments in AI are happening at a speed which makes social media development look positively leisurely. And if anything, MPs feel even less confident about their understanding of AI. We have to change our processes if we are to present ourselves looking as if we can only stand by and watch in the rear view mirror as hugely impactful changes race ahead. And once again, we can do this without difficulty. We need to power up the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee, boosting the technical expertise available to them and delegating to them powers to legislate. Members of those committees will become a centre of expertise, a bit like those on the Public Accounts Committees, whose members serve a considerable period of time and command the confidence of the House as they go into things in the depth that most MPs don't. We can't leave it to government to regulate without parliamentary accountability. These are big issues of public policy. We can't leave it to the regulators. They have no democratic accountability or legitimacy to take huge public policy decisions. So the way forward is for Parliament to change its processes, as it's shown itself perfectly capable of doing on numerous previous occasions. And my last point is another change we need in order to make Parliament more effective on doing what the public want. And that's about being an effective democracy for women. When I was first elected, there was only 3% women, 97% men. The 21 women, of which I was one, were safely on the margins, and politics was firmly about men taking decisions about men and women's lives. Now, 4 decades on, the attitudes and numbers has changed, with the prediction that after this general election, there will be not 21 women, like when I first joined, but 250 women in the House of Commons. And although across different parties, there is a common agenda which all of those women will support. And it's one which has grown out of the women's movement's demands for childcare, for an end to male violence against women, for equal pay and equality in decision-making. Hitherto, women have largely struggled within their own parties to pursue these changes, supported by informal and ad hoc working between women across parties. But I think we should follow the example of the Scottish Parliament, where the presiding officer, who's their speaker, has just established a women's caucus, which has brought together women from all the parties, Labour, Tory, Green, Lib Dem and SNP. Now, no government welcomes cross-party working when it cuts across the traditional whipped lines, but the public does. Changes in social attitudes demand that women are not just in Parliament, but they are able to deliver on the agenda for women in this country in a way that hitherto has not happened. So I hope to see that too in the next Parliament, and with the increase in influence of the misogynistic backlash against women from the likes of Andrew Tate through to the political far right, this is really necessary now. There's a lot of focus on racism in the far right, but actually if you look, that is coupled together with absolute misogyny as well. So women in the House of Commons need to band together to protect the gains that we've made, but also to make sure that we deliver further. It's been a privilege to share these thoughts with you, and as I stand down from my decades in Parliament, Parliament. I know over those years I have done a lot. I know that because I looked at those reports before I put them in the boxes. But there is still much left to do, and I'll be cheering on the next generation to do it. Thank you.
So, thank you. Fascinating. I am sure there will be lots of questions from this very packed audience. I don't know where to begin. I've got so many. But I'm going to take the privilege of kicking off by reflecting on the fact that this is a STEM college. You talked about AI and changing the processes of the way regulation is done. But you're a champion for diversity, and I would like to ask you, how can we get a more diverse pool of backgrounds into Parliament, not just race or sex/gender, or, there are a lot that are talked about a lot, socioeconomic disadvantage being another one. But the reality is that we have a lot of MPs who have studied PPE, we know that, or law. The number of people who were captains of industry or GPs has fallen during the time you've been an MP, I would guess. And the number of scientists, I mean, we're losing Margaret Beckett, who was trained as a scientist. The number of scientists is tiny, and yet so many of the democratic decisions that need to be made are rooted in science. So how can we diversify in that respect to get a better pool of, or a wider pool of MPs who are better placed to answer the questions like AI?
Well, I think that certainly our party has what you want in candidates is you want people who are going to do local leadership and work hard. But when you're heading, as you hope you're heading into government, you want a real range of skills and experience on the government benches. And I think you're going to see, and we'll have to do there will be lots of analysis of the new MPs when they come in. And there is going to be, whatever the outcome of the election in terms of, the parties, there is going to be a massive change in the House of Commons, biggest that there's ever been, because of so many MPs standing down. And I think that there is quite a diversity, particularly because the PPE types, I know exactly who you're speaking about, and there are an awful lot of them. But actually, they tend to get the safer seats, the retirement seats, but the more marginal seats tend to be populated by people who are less like mainstream politics. So I've seen quite a lot of diversity in the seats that we might not have expected to win, but actually hope that we might. So you're going to see a whole range of people who will bring to the House experience that the House actually needs and will speak with authority on it. I was pleased to note, actually, there's a woman prison officer standing in one of the seats we hope to win in Doncaster. Actually, I think it's a retirement seat, so it's good. But I think there's going to be, hold your judgment until you actually have a look and an analysis. But you're right to always be wary, because it's supposed to be a representative institution. It is not representative if people are all the same in a lather of fermented agreement with each other. So it's really important that there is that diversity. But I think you will get occupational diversity in this next Parliament. But we will have to look at the issue of, what the sector's representation is.
Okay.
Anne Campbell, who I was with earlier on, she was a maths graduate and was just talking, we were trying to count up how many maths and science people we've got and are coming in. I think Gillian Keegan was also a chemist, wasn't she? You know, so...
She was an apprentice, remember?
Oh, she was an apprentice, but she might be going. She's not planning to, but she might be.
Yes. Indeed. Well, I'm glad you're optimistic. I may say that we have an employee of this college, I'm just looking around, I can't see her, who is standing, there she is, standing in Ely and... There you go. But she's not, I think, a scientist, I'm afraid, but despite that, she's an alum as well. Okay, I should not hog it, I've got loads of questions, but yes, so Simon... There are roving mics. If you'd like just to introduce yourself, Harriet may well know you.
Simon MacDonald from Christ College. 2 questions, please, Harriet. One very specific, one general. The specific one is, when is the right time for a dissolution honours list? And the general one is it possible to restore trust between ministers and civil servants?
Right, I'm not sure. I think we should probably take a couple and see if there are any themes coming out. There's a question here. You're taking notes.
Oh, right, I am, of course, you'd expect.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yeah.
Sean Lang from Anglia Ruskin University. I'd like to follow up the Master's point about the diversity of intake into the House of Commons, because you can never entirely control the intake into the House of Commons because we have an electorate. But isn't that where the case for the wholesale reform of the House of Lords could come in?
Simon may have views on that one too. Right, would you like to?
Okay. When's the right time for dissolution honours? I've no idea. We've had dissolution, but we haven't got the honours. So I'm just assuming there's some sort of ding-dong going on. Somebody very bad has been put on the list and is fighting to stay on. And the powers that be that are scrutinising them are trying to get rid of them. But, you know, at some point, I think, once they've done due diligence is the answer to that question. I think trust between ministers and civil servants, I would say that what needs to happen, it feels to me, is to restore the confidence of civil servants. Because when I was in government back in the day, there was a real confidence of civil servants, and if you were doing something which is not warranted or outside a remit or ultra vires or something like that, they would not only tell you, but you sort of couldn't do it. The machinery would not operate. And that seems to have gone. And all sorts of things are happening, which I see happening now, which we never, even if we'd have tried, we could have got away with. I'll give you one example. Sorry to mention Gillian Keegan again, but basically she said, she did a guidance for schools about inappropriate materials in terms of trans and gender issues being used in primary schools and in schools generally. And she, you know, guidance was issued, you know, and being consulted on, a press statement was issued about these inappropriate materials that were being used in schools. That was the foundation of it, these materials. So I asked her a written parliamentary question. What is the material that's being used? And which schools was it being used in? And how many were there? Because I hadn't heard of it in my own constituency. And the answer came back from her that the department doesn't collect that information. So the whole thing was based on nothing. And, you know, and yet the civil service machinery was being used to put out a press notice, to do official departmental comms and everything like that. And the whole thing, but as I say, the civil service have been being blamed and named for things. The government has got into the habit of blaming the civil service for its own faults, along with lots of other people, I would say, but also blaming the civil service in a way that's made the civil service feel downright defensive and undervalued, and has kind of knocked the stuffing out of them. And that is very bad for government, because you actually need that inbuilt, independent, non-party team which is belonging to every and any government to be strong and confident. But I would say that Keir Starmer has recruited somebody right from the heart of what I would call the old school civil service, which is Sue Gray, who I've got an awful lot of confidence in. She knows the importance of the civil service, and she was responsible for ethics in the Cabinet Office. And I think she will want to, you know, I'm sure there'll be some modernisation, there always is, but she will want the civil service to be able to play a really important role. So I hope to see that happen. Incidentally, I think there'll be some machinery of government changes around the centre in terms of the Cabinet Office, number 10, and the Treasury. I don't have any insider information on this, so don't go out and place a bet, but I'm actually thinking that it's likely to happen. As far as whether or not the diversity of intake of the House of Lords, I think that, yes, I think the House of Lords can and should be used to bring specific expertise into the legislative process. But at the end of the day, there's no substitute for it being in the House of Commons with the legitimacy that comes from being elected.
Right, let's take a couple more questions. Piers?
Piers Brendan, I'm a fellow of the college and Alan's predecessor. How are you going to deal with the insidious pressure of the lobbyists? We saw that David Cameron said that this was the major problem that his government faced when he came into power, and we all know how that ended. There seems to be an almost... the power of the lobbyists seems to be impossible to deal with. And as we know, Peter Mandelson said that he had no objection to people getting filthy rich, provided they pay their taxes. They are precisely the people, of course, who can afford to pay accountants to avoid paying their taxes. And my question is, how does this insidious corruption, how is the future Labour government going to avoid that?
Well, you wanted
Well,
another
no,
question?
go ahead.
Oh, I think that, again, one thing that people absolutely loathe is the idea that sort of sectional interests will overweigh by lobbying what is in the public interest. But I think that it all comes from the centre, really. And I think that Keir Starmer will want to reach out to all sections of the private as well as the public sector to draw in information about what needs to be done. But will certainly be clamping down on the idea of paid lobbying. I think that's got to be tightened up. And in fact, we put in our manifesto that the idea there should be further strengthening of preventing MPs being, paid to be lobbyists. Incidentally, I think that one of the things that has struck me is that some MPs have not got the point of being in public service, and yet we do have the Nolan principles, the 7 principles of public life. And I think one of the things we should do, and in the Standards Committee of the House of Commons, which I chair, we just produced a report just after the election was called, but before the House was dissolved, looking at regulation across the piece, which is a very big, weighty report, so do have a look at it. But we did actually think that it would be a good idea, because when we come in, we swear an oath of allegiance, well, it'll be to the King now, and we all line up and swear an oath of allegiance to the King. But we don't sign up or make any declaration to the 7 principles of public life. And it just, obviously some people need to be reminded of what those 7 principles are. And it's a bit like sort of, getting married. You might not keep your marriage vows, but it's a good idea in public, in front of all your friends and family, to say, we are doing this for this reason. And I think if MPs, in front of all their constituents, obviously they'd be putting it on their TikTok and into Instagram and everything like that, would be saying, I am here, not for greed, not for self-interest, in the public interest, I'm going to be accountable and transparent. it would be a good way to start. So I'd like to see the taking the seats process change to include that, so that when somebody is rung up by somebody saying there's some private company and would they like to be paid £500,000, £50,000 for lobbying ministers and getting their fellow MPs to sign it, they remember that's not the job. That is not what the job is. So, but I think that, we're going to be turning over a new page, so I'm very hopeful that we will say goodbye to those bad old ways.
There's a question at the front here.
Thank you very much. Ben Dean, one of the Roskill grandchildren and a civil servant. You mentioned, well, we've obviously seen 5 missions, the manifesto, fairly high level. So project yourself forward 5 years, if you would. And for you, very personally, like, what will a successful Keir Starmer Labour government have achieved? What you want to be holding them to account for? And I'll challenge you here to try and be specific rather than like the missions. And a follow-on would be, what radical thing would you like to see?
I think that the most important thing, and why I hope we will have a decent majority, is that I want to see him implement the manifesto. I mean, one of the things that people always say, you promised this and you didn't do it. So I think first off, he has absolutely got to deliver all the things in the manifesto. And, I would like to see all of those things that are still hanging around from my 1982 reports about childcare and such like. But I kind of think I've got to sort of learn the process of not knowing better than him what should be done, and just being supportive. So I'm going to restrain myself and not answer. What do you think he should be doing? Oh, right. Well, yeah. I'm phasing out my views as well, so.
Right, there's a woman on the aisle side here, please.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Fiona Cornish, GP in Cambridge. You were an amazing trailblazer for working women, and I'm just interested to know whether your children resented you being an MP, and whether they think they did suffer, as all those men were telling them they were going to. In fact, they may be here, I don't know. But I think that being the child of an MP, or even 2 MPs, I think there are a few husband and wife teams, do you think that nowadays the impact on the children is the same as in any other professional job, or do you think it's still a really difficult family position to be in if your mother is an MP?
Well, I think it's difficult if your parents in public life, because people are judging you by what they're doing, and it's more difficult, I think, if it's your mother, because that might well be the parent who's got most responsibility for your care. But as to my children, I mean, when I was first elected in this by-election, because it was quite high profile, and I was pregnant when I was elected, I got sackfuls of post, and it was, half of it was women saying, fantastic that you got elected, good for you, we're right behind you, get on with it. And the other half was, what on earth are you doing? You will ruin your child's life. And that is frightening as a soon-to-be parent to read that, because you can't be sure that they're not right, because it hadn't been kind of done in that way before. And the only thing I can say about my children is that I kind of, maternal guilt is a thing. I don't know, I just feel that it's just part of being a mother. You always feel guilty all the time. And if you're a working mother, you have to feel guilty about your work as well as about being a mother. So that's my sort of in-principle position. But my husband was a sort of propagandist in the home. And he would say, what a remarkable woman your mother is. She is absolutely changing the world. And what a remarkable woman your mother is cooking this lovely dinner. All other mothers must be completely unable to cook anything like this. And I was sort of listened to this thinking it was absolutely sort of bonkers, and certainly not rooted in reality. But it kind of put around the kids a sense that there was a cause and a purpose, and everything was marvellous, and that's what you should do. You should be going out there doing things. But I do remember once when I went to China, and I thought, oh God, this is terrible. I'm going to China. I'm leaving my sort of 7-year-old daughter. What on earth am I doing going to the other side of the world to speak to the All Chinese Women's Federation? And, you know, a month or so later, my daughter was watching TV, and I said, you know, said something to her, and she said, shh, I'm watching the TV. And I realized she was watching something about China on telly. And what had happened is you always think of what you're taking away from your children, but actually I had brought China to her by the fact that she knew I was there. So it was part of her world. She was interested in it. So actually, what I didn't realize was that I was giving the children a sense of the outside world, even though I was in it, not them. So that's just what I'm hoping, really. But, you know, it's too early to tell. They're only in their 40s. You know.
Right, we'll take one more question in the middle at the back there.
Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. I'm Jill Campion from St Catherine's College, Cambridge. I'm studying government decision-making on infrastructure, nationally significant infrastructure.
Can you hold the mic?
Government decision-making on?
Nationally significant infrastructure.
Oh.
And I am interested in your views on whether we need to change the culture in British politics to a more collaborative style, given the immense changes of net zero ahead of us. Thank you.
I mean, you know, there are... You know, there's this sort of, you know, transport. There are so many issues which require longer than one parliament and require cross-party work to sustain them and to sustain confidence of a sort of trajectory. Net zero is obviously one of them, you know, same as transport infrastructure is. Social care is as well. It's just quite difficult to work out how to engineer the politics of doing that, because basically politics, you know, is a competition, essentially, binary. And I think there's no kind of easy answer to that. But I actually think one of the ways that Keir could do this, especially if he has a big majority. Please don't anybody mention the word supermajority, absolutely bonkers, but is that I think he should need to say straight away, the government doesn't have a monopoly of all wisdom. We will be bringing forward legislation, but if backbenchers from our own side or frontbenchers or backbenchers from the opposing side bring forward things which are sensible, we'll accept them. And it won't be any skin off our nose, we will accept them. At the moment, if a bill is brought forward and, God forbid, some backbenchers gang up and get an amendment, it's regarded as a government defeat. It's called a defeat. And it somehow needs to be recharacterised so that it's sensible decision-making which draws in everybody there. And if that can happen, then there are some things that can be built on that. Because, you know, if people are totally excluded, they just... you know, fight a war of attrition. But if they're actually included, there might be some issues which can survive with that sort of consensus. And obviously, net zero has to be one of those. You know, a bit of competition on those issues is a good thing because to push things further and faster. But there's got to be some stability in the whole thing, or else you simply can't invest for the future.
Well, thank you. That's been absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure everyone has taken away some key messages from it. Now, before I let you, and indeed the audience, go off and get a well-served drink, I just wanted to ask you, are you really going to relax now?
Well, I was just saying that I remember an MP saying to me that when she lost her seat, when you lose those letters MP after your name, you will absolutely lose your sense of identity, and it would be absolutely terrible. And I've lost the letters MP after my name, but I don't seem to have noticed it at all. And I seem to be sort of busier than ever, but that is not the plan. The plan is to sort of be more sort of measured and sort of statesperson-like. But I haven't quite... Bonnie there. But I haven't got there yet. It doesn't feel very relaxing right now, but it's very adrenalised at the moment, isn't it?
Next week.
Yeah.
Next week you can start relaxing. Anyhow, thank you. It's been brilliant. Let's thank Harriet. Thank you.
Thank you.